Welcome to Headstones and Microphones, where we use AI to step into the past through a researched, first-person simulation of history's most interesting people. I am your host, Calvin. While we've added some creative storytelling, our goal is to inspire your own study of these fascinating lives. Now, let's meet our guest. I am beyond excited for today's guest. He's a scientist, an inventor, a diplomat, and honestly, the list goes on. For those who may somehow not know who you are, who are you?
In my time, I wore many hats: printer, writer, postmaster, and a bit of a tinkerer with lightning. But most people simply know me as Ben Franklin. I like to think of myself as a man who just never stopped asking why.
A man of many talents indeed. Let's go back to the very beginning. When and where were you born?
I arrived on a cold Sunday morning, January 17th, 1706, right in the heart of Boston, Massachusetts.
And what was your given name at birth?
Just Benjamin Franklin. Though with 16 siblings, I was often just the youngest son.
16 siblings. Wow. Is there a story behind your birth name?
My father, Josiah, named me after his favorite brother, Benjamin, who was quite the clever fellow himself and lived in England. I suppose I had big shoes to fill from day one.
What was your hometown like growing up?
Boston was a bustling, salty seaside town back then. It was filled with the smell of the docks, the sound of church bells, and a lot of very serious-minded people. It was a place of hard work and even harder winters.
What was your family life like with that many brothers and sisters?
It was crowded, noisy, and wonderful. My father was a tallow chandler. He made candles and soap. Our house was always filled with the scent of boiling wax. We weren't wealthy, but my father made sure we always had a sensible guest at the dinner table to spark intelligent conversation. That's where I learned to love a good debate.
What kind of kid were you?
I was a bit of a bookworm, I must admit. I would spend what little money I had on books rather than sweets. I was also quite the swimmer. I used to try to find ways to move faster through the water, even experimenting with wooden paddles for my hands and feet.
What were your biggest fears growing up?
My biggest fear was likely the thought of being stuck in a trade that didn't allow me to think or write. My father wanted me to be a minister, then a candle maker, but my heart just wasn't in the wax vats. I feared a life without books.
What did you dream of becoming as a child?
For a time, I desperately wanted to go to sea. I loved the water and the idea of adventure. My father, however, had seen enough of my older brothers head off to sea never to return, so he stayed firm on keeping me on dry land.
What were some of your favorite activities in school?
I only had 2 years of formal schooling, can you believe it? But I excelled in reading and writing. Math, on the other hand, well, let's just say I failed arithmetic quite miserably back then. I had to teach myself the numbers later in life.
What was your first job?
I started out helping my father with the candles, cutting wicks and smelling like fat all day. But my real start was as an apprentice to my brother James in his printing shop. That's where I truly found my calling.
Was there a moment where you realized you were different from everyone else?
I think it was when I realized I could write as well as the men whose papers we were printing. I started writing letters under the pseudonym Silence Dogood and slipped them under the door of my brother's newspaper. Everyone loved them, thinking they were from a wise, witty widow. When I revealed it was just me, a teenager, let's just say my brother wasn't as amused as the public.
What's a decision that changed everything for you but felt small at the time?
Leaving Boston for Philadelphia. I was 17, had very little money, and was essentially running away from my apprenticeship. I arrived in Philly with nothing but 3 great puffy rolls of bread under my arms. It felt like a desperate move at the time, but it gave me the room to become my own man.
What was your biggest break?
Securing the contract to print the Pennsylvania Gazette. It gave me a platform to share my ideas, my humor, and eventually, the fame that allowed me to pursue science and politics.
What were your biggest struggles before success?
Money was always tight early on. I lived very frugally, eating mainly gruel and water, so I could afford to buy more books and printing supplies. I worked harder than any other printer in town, often wheeling my own paper through the streets in a wheelbarrow, just to show people I wasn't above manual labor.
Did you ever consider quitting?
Never! I might have changed direction, moving from printing to science, or from science to diplomacy, but I was always driven by the idea of being useful. To quit would be to stop being useful, and that just wasn't in my nature.
Were there any specific daily habits or routines that you feel are essential to your success?
Oh, I was a stickler for my precepts of virtue. Every morning at 5 a.m., I would ask myself, what good shall I do this day? And every night before bed, what good have I done today? I also took air baths, sitting in my room completely naked with the windows open to let the fresh air invigorate my skin. It was quite refreshing.
What job would you have had if fame never happened?
I likely would have remained a very content, very busy printer. There is something so satisfying about the smell of ink and the clacking of a press.
What was your life like before fame?
It was simple. I worked long hours, spent my evenings with my Junto Club, a group of friends who met to discuss philosophy and morals, and tried to be a good husband to my dear Deborah.
How did relationships change after success?
You find that more people want your time, but you have less of it to give. It took me away from home for many years, especially when I was in London and France. I made incredible friends across the ocean, but I often missed the simple life in Philadelphia.
Did fame bring happiness?
Happiness to me came from discovery and service. Fame was simply a tool that made it easier to get things done, like starting a library or a fire department. If I had been famous but useless, I would have been miserable.
What was the downside of becoming famous?
The lack of privacy, certainly, and the fact that people often expected me to be a quote-unquote sage all the time. Sometimes I just wanted to tell a joke or play the glass harmonica without it being a quote-unquote historic event.
What misconceptions did people have about you?
People often thought I was a very somber, serious philosopher. In reality, I loved a good prank, a glass of wine, and a bit of flirtation. I wasn't nearly as stuffy as my portraits might suggest.
What was your darkest moment?
Losing my son Francis to smallpox when he was only 4 years old. I had intended to inoculate him, but delayed it. It was a regret I carried forever, and I spent the rest of my life urging others to protect their children.
What's something people misunderstood about your life?
Some thought I was only interested in money because of Poor Richard's Almanac and all my talk about thrift. But I never patented a single one of my inventions. I believed that as we enjoy great advantages from the inventions of others, we should be glad of an opportunity to serve others by any invention of ours.
Who had the biggest influence on your life?
My father, for teaching me the value of honest labor and good conversation. And perhaps Cotton Mather, not for his theology, but for his book, Essays to Do Good, which set my moral compass early on.
What was life like in your final years?
I was back in Philadelphia, surrounded by my grandchildren. I was quite slowed down by gout and a stone in my bladder, which made moving painful, but my mind remained as busy as ever. I spent a lot of time writing my autobiography and working with the Pennsylvania Society for promoting the abolition of slavery.
What were you working on in your career before you passed away?
I was very focused on the abolition of slavery. It was my final great cause. I also kept up a massive correspondence with scientists and friends in Europe. I never stopped writing.
When and where did you pass away?
I took my final breath in Philadelphia on April 17, 1790. I was 84 years old.
What's a random fact about you most people have never heard?
I was an avid chess player. I used to play for hours, sometimes until the sun came up. I even wrote an essay called The Morals of Chess.
What's the craziest rumor ever told about you?
That I wanted the national bird of America to be the turkey. While I did write a letter to my daughter saying that turkey was a much more respectable bird than the bald eagle, who I called a bird of bad moral character, I never officially proposed it for the Great Seal. But it makes for a funny story.
What was your most unique habit?
Aside from my make-it air baths, I suppose it was my habit of carrying a hollow walking stick filled with oil, so I could pour it on rough water to see if it would truly calm the waves. It actually worked.
What was your favorite food?
A simple turkey or a nice piece of salt cod. But if I'm being honest, I had a great love for American cranberries and apples when I was living abroad. I used to have them shipped to me in London.
What was your favorite book?
Aside from Pilgrim's Progress, which I read over and over as a boy, I was very fond of Plutarch's Lives.
Did you have any known rivalries?
Oh, certainly. My relationship with my own son, William, became quite bitter because he remained a loyalist during the revolution while I was a patriot. It was a rivalry that broke my heart.
Tell us a story nobody talks about.
Once, while trying to kill a turkey with electricity for a dinner party, I accidentally shocked myself so hard I knocked myself unconscious. I told my friends I meant to kill a turkey and instead almost killed a goose. I was quite embarrassed.
Did you ever prank someone?
Frequently. In my almanac, I once predicted the exact date and hour of the death of a rival polymath named Titus Leeds. When the day came and he didn't die, I insisted in print that he had actually died and that the man claiming to be him was an imposter. It drove him absolutely mad.
What was the most outlandish purchase you made?
I spent a good deal of money on my printing presses, of course, but I also had a very fine set of glass bowls made for my harmonica. It was a musical instrument I invented, and the sound was so ethereal people thought it was played by angels, or that it drove people crazy.
What advice would you give people chasing success?
Diligence is the mother of good luck. Don't wait for a miracle. Work as if everything depends on you, and pray as if everything depends on God. And remember, an investment in knowledge pays the best interest.
Ben, this has been an absolute honor. Do you have any closing remarks about the interview or the stories you shared that you would like to share with the listeners before signing off?
Just that I am delighted to see that curiosity is still alive and well in the world. Life is a grand experiment, and I hope you all continue to tinker, to learn, and to be useful to one another. Thank you for inviting an old printer back for one more chat.
From the silent do-good letters to the kite and the key, Benjamin Franklin truly lived 1,000 lives in one. What a legend. Thank you so much for joining us, Ben. And that wraps up another conversation from beyond the grave. Thanks for joining us on the Headstones and Microphones podcast. Remember, legends may die, but their stories never do. Please help spread the word by sharing and following the pod.